welcome to Victober 2023. This is going to be my month-long reading vlog of all things Victorian and Victorian adjacent. I'll talk about it all, and also just October fun. But this is how I'm going to kick it off. I've already started reading Orley Farm by Anthony Trollope, and I am absolutely loving it. No one is more shocked than me. I am definitely one of those people who have always thought you're either a Dickens fan or a Trollope fan, and you can't be both. Not really. You always love one more than the other, and I definitely love Dickens. But I've always only read Trollope while also reading Dickens, and I think that wasn't very fair to Trollope. So I'm really loving Orley Farm. Maybe it's just that book. Maybe it's that I'm not reading Dickens right now. I don't know, but I'm really loving it. I'm 6 chapters in. My goal is to read 3 chapters a day. And that gives me a little wiggle room to not actually read 3 chapters a day and still finish with a little bit of extra time. I am also reading The Prisoner of Zenda, and that is quite the ride. It is basically a Victorian Parent Trap. So far, I think that's how it's going to be. And then today, I'm obviously at work. That's not my home back there. I'm obviously at work, and today I'm going to start reading Love Among the Butterflies: The Diaries of a Wayward, Determined, and Passionate Victorian Lady. And this is going to be my at-school reading material. It's short, there's no audio for it, and it will work perfectly to read while my students each day have their silent reading time. So that's how I'll get through that one. If I envision finishing Prisoner of Zenda within the next couple of days. It's less than 200 pages and it reads very, very quickly. I'm actually having to slow myself down so that I'm taking it in and not zoom through it. It would be a very, very easy, voracious read. But I want to enjoy it. And Trollope will be with me all month. I think I'll pick up Kidnapped after I finish Prisoner of Zenda, but before I do that, I'll stop here and tell you all about Prisoner of Zenda. And I'm sure that, it's very fall and autumn outside, so I'm sure that all throughout this video, I will be placing plenty of B-roll. Yeah, anyway, welcome to Victober. Let's get this party started. Oh, hey, I'm supposed to be vlogging my Victober reading. The sun is really bright. I'm supposed to be vlogging my Victober reading. And by the way, that's our resident nun right there. I'm not Catholic, but I teach at a Catholic school. And I have done a terrible job. I have done a tremendously terrible job at vlogging my Victober reading. At this point, I have completed 2 books. 1 book. I've completed 1 Victober book. other not Victober books. And that one is The Prisoner of Zinda, and it was so good. I am also like 300-ish pages into Orley Farm, and super happy to say that I'm loving that as well. And I think I'm about 50 pages away from the end of Kidnapped, and I am loving that as well. It's been a great reading month so far. I just haven't vlogged anything. So hopefully we can, I'm trying to find a place to rest you, but also like not blind you. Hopefully I can sit down and really get some vlogging in the next few days. But let me say this in between my classes today, and in a rare moment where nobody is at either of the other desks in my office, let me say this, that it is a very good Victober this year. I am having such a great reading month. The Prisoner of Zinda, super, super fun. And I want to tell you more about it, but let's be honest, I don't know if I will, but I definitely will check in when I finish reading Kidnapped. And I want to do a check-in at about the 400-page mark on Orley Farm. That book is cracking me up. I love Orley Farm, and I do not like Trollop, but I'm wondering now if maybe what I really like in Trollop is the standalones, and I'm gonna give another standalone a try after I finish Orley Farm because I'm digging him. I'm digging him right now. I'm also almost finished with In the Land of Butterflies, In the Time of Butterflies, something about butterflies, love and butterflies. The Victorian woman who kept her journals. Whew, she was a wild woman. She was a wild woman. So many love affairs. But we'll get to that. We'll get to that. I just wanted to do a quick check-in, hold myself accountable, get myself back on the vlogging train, and make this a Victober vlog, make it a reality. So there we are, checked in. I'm gonna do better, gonna do a lot better. And it's like the 11th day of Victober. 1 down, 2 almost down, right on track with Orley Farm. I'll check in again soon. I mean, for you, it'll be like 5 seconds. I have done the absolute worst possible job at keeping you updated on what I've been reading. There is my stack of reads, finished and in progress for the month of October. And I have not been vlogging. I've been vlogging. I've been B-rolling. I have not checked in with a single vlog this entire month, and it's now the 22nd. So I am just gonna power through all of these and give you the rundown on how reading in October has gone. But let's go get somewhere more comfortable. Creme brulee creamer in my coffee and a maple donut, and everything outside is overcast, and it's a little bit early in the morning, but not that early in the morning. And Lola is at her favorite seat for when I do videos here at the table. And we're just gonna dive into catching up. Oh, actually that's a pumpkin spice donut, not a maple one. I wanted maple. That's okay. As I said, I have done the worst job of keeping this vlog. I am going to go ahead and catch you up on the things that I have read this month and the things that are in progress, and maybe even the things that I probably won't get to, that I wanted to get to for Victober, and just general spooky reads this month. So let's start with things that I have finished in no particular order. It's just a stack of books. So for Victober, I did read Love Among the Butterflies, The Diaries of a Wayward, Determined, and Passionate Victorian Lady. This is the first installment in a series of journal entries, and they are her original journal entries. These are all things that were written during the Victorian period. Her journals do span all the way to the 1930s, but the ones in this volume are all from the 1800s. And there were some very fun things in here, especially in the introduction, that introduced us to her. It says, in 1940, I'm reading from the introduction of this book, and it says, in 1940, an elderly English woman was discovered dying by the roadside near Mount St. Benedict on the island of Trinidad in the West Indies. A butterfly net was by her. She had apparently suffered a heart attack but was still conscious. She was found by a member of the local house of a religious order, Brother Bruno, who carried her in his arms to the nearby guest house where she had been staying. She died soon afterwards. The elderly woman was Margaret Elizabeth Fontaine, a tireless traveler and a distinguished collector of what her will described as diurnal Lepidoptera, which the layman may be allowed to call butterflies. Under the terms of this will, there were delivered in November 1940 to the Castle Museum in Norwich 10 handsome mahogany display cases containing in all about 22,000 butterflies, rank after rank, drawer after drawer, of Miss Fontaine's life's work. They were said, the will, to be known for all time as the Fontaine Nimmy Collection. They are a beautiful but, again, to the layman, slightly chilling sight, so much dead brilliance. With the display cases came a sealed and padlocked black japanned box some 2 feet long by a foot wide and a foot high, contained in a strapped cover of heavy canvas. This, said the will, contained manuscripts, but must not be opened until the 15th of April, 1978. A similar message in Miss Fontaine's hand was on a label bearing the date 5th September, 1939. What was in that and what was opened in 1978 were her diaries. I'll skip ahead. It says they were her diaries from 1878 when she was not yet 16, thus 100 years after her death. She wanted to give her diaries to the world. Not 100 years after her death, 100 years after starting the diaries. So they were her diaries from 1878 when she was not yet 16 until 1939, a few months before her death. On top was a single sheet of paper which explained a great deal. Before presenting this, the story of my life, to those, whoever they may be, 100 years from the date on which it was first commenced, it began. It spoke of the greatest passion of my life, and of the Charles Nimmie whose name the collection bore, and whose love and friendship for me endured for 27 years, and it ended, to the reader, maybe yet unbored, I leave this record of the wild and fearless life of one of the South Acre children. South Acre was the parsonage that her father, the church that her father was curate of. It talks a little bit about the contents, especially of her younger days, and it mentions this, which I think is very Victorian and interesting. It says, Mama does not appear in a good light in Miss Fontaine's diaries. To be fair to her, one should remember that she married at 29 in 1860 a man of 45, probably very set in his sporting parson's ways, that she spent her married life confined in more ways than one in a tiny parish with little hope of a move to more busy or interesting places, that in the first 6 years of her marriage she produced a child a year, and in the next 5, 2 more, and that her husband was so inconsiderate as to leave her a widow at 46 with these 8 children to rear, one of them at least a strong-minded, if not obstinate girl with a weakness for falling in love with the most unsuitable men. And so much of her diary entries are not about butterflies and not about the interesting places, the locations that she's in. And she's everywhere. She's in Milan and Switzerland and Italy and Sicily and Hungary and Budapest and Bath and Monte Carlo, France. I'm reading them as I scroll through. Greece, Damascus, Badluk, Syria, Vienna, Algeria, Crete, back to Syria, Constantinople, Algeria, back to Bath, Spain, Washington, Herzegovina, South Africa, Virginia, Jamaica, India, Ceylon, Sikkim. It goes. She goes all over the world. And most of her entries are about the guys that she likes. Which is just so spot on for a young girl, Victorian era or no. And she's got a great, voice. I do want to read the bit. It says, so she kept notes regularly throughout the year, jotting them down wherever she might be. One April, for example, she notes that she was writing the words on a train between Vienna and Budapest. Later, these notes, possibly after drafting into a continuous narrative, were copied into the ledger-like manuscript books in which they are preserved. Usually, this fair copy was made during the year following, often once she had begun traveling, during the months when she would return to England. So she is her own editor, and she has created a fair copy or the public copy of the notes that she scribbles throughout the year. It says intentional exclamations and dashes are rare, and underlining, a popularly supposed habit of the Victorian lady, hardly occurs. I never knew that the underlining was a popularly supposed habit of the Victorian lady, but apparently so. Her spelling is usually sound, her errors occasionally delightful. In one of her gloomier moments, she speaks of laboring under a heavy yoke, like an egg yolk, instead of a yoke. At a more cheerful time, she enters the world of Lewis Carroll with an account of little lizards gambling in the sun instead of gambling in the sun. And then it says most of the volumes have a studio portrait of Miss Fontaine as a front piece. There's Miss Fontaine. That's one of the images from her diary. And it says most of the volumes have a studio portrait of Miss Fontaine as a front piece. Less a vanity than might be thought, for she did not photograph well. The majority of these portraits have a wretchedly stiff, uneasy air, and none make her a beauty, and yet she was, without doubt, an attractive woman, even were one to discount her own circumstantial accounts of the attentions paid to her. There is the description written by Mr. Norman Riley, who first met her in 1913 when she was a young entomologist at the Natural History Museum in South Kensington, which she would often visit to aid or confirm her identification of newly collected butterflies. He calls her a tall, attractive, rather frail-looking, different, but determined middle-aged woman. She was pale and looked tired, but the strongest impression she gave me was of great sadness, a sadness that seemed to envelop her entirely. It was not long, however, before I discovered that this veil of sadness could be penetrated by self-deprecating flashes of humor that quite transformed her. So, if you are looking for some really fun diary entries to read, it's very readable because remember, these are her finished pieces. These are the year in review, basically, of each year. And each year runs a different amount of pages depending on how old she is, where she's going, what's happening in her love life. And it's super delightful. It's super delightful. Highly recommend. Very readable. I would like to find another volume, like the second volume in these. I don't know how many there are, but yeah, I like Margaret Fontaine. She's a little bit superficial, but likable. She's likable. So this was a hit. That was definitely a hit. I read the last book in Madeleine L'Engle's Troubling a Star, Austen Family Chronicles. It's called Troubling a Star. And this is the second least read of these for me. I have some that I just really love to read, and this is my least favorite one in the 5-book series, is the one where they move to New York for the year with the genie. I really enjoyed it this year. Lots of times I get a little bit annoyed with it. It feels more YA than the other ones. This is my second least favorite. It's very much about espionage. She gets sent to she gets sent on a trip to Antarctica, and it's a romance and very much about espionage. She gets stranded on an iceberg, and the reasons behind it are very political. And I enjoy the book. I enjoy the writing. I think I would actually really like the book, except that it's the last book in the series, and we don't really see much of most of the family, only of Vicky. And Vicky is wonderful, and she is the solid through line for all of the books, for sure. But if it's the last book in the series, which I assume Madeleine L'Engle did not realize it would be the last book in the series, but if it's the last book in the series, you want more resolution. In a way, it's nice to know that they just continue living on, the Austens being the Austens, but in another way, I would have liked more nostalgia, I guess, and more time with the rest of the family. I read and really enjoyed Robert Louis Stevenson's Kidnapped. I'd read Treasure Island, but I did not know the story of Kidnapped at all. And it is another swashbuckling pirate adventure, but the premise is that this guy, what's his name? David Balfour. His parents have died, and the will tells him to go to this address, talk to this guy. He gets there and he finds out it's his uncle. He didn't know that he had an uncle. He didn't know he had family. And the uncle's super weird. Ends up selling him into human trafficking. He's going to have him be an indentured servant in the colonies. But of course things go awry on the high seas. And it is about David Balfour coming back, getting back and claiming his inheritance from this uncle, this stingy uncle. And honestly, the first couple of chapters that take place in the family castle, which is cold and dank and dark and inhabited by this Schmeagol type character of an uncle, I wish that the whole book had taken part in that setting. I would have really, really loved the gothic vibes of that. But you get the Gothic vibes, and Robert Louis Stevenson proves that he's amazing at creating a vibe. And then he gets sent off on his adventure. It ends on a serious cliffhanger, like pretty much in the middle of an action. And I first was pretty upset. I was like, how is this the end? What has happened? And then I realized there is a second book in this series, and it will pick up pretty much in the middle of that same action. So I will read that in next year for Victober. I'm very excited to finish that. I think it's called Catriona. And I'm very excited to find out what actually becomes of David Balfour. It's a very fun read and a very fun book. There's also some Scottish politics going on in there, and a lot of the time there's one character that makes me think of Jamie Fraser a lot because I've read all the Outlander books except the most two recent. I did pause on that, but I got through most of them to the point where I have 2 that have been published and the one that's the final book that's not yet published that I'll read some other time. But I've ingested a lot of Outlander this year, and so pretty much everybody who's Scottish reminds me of Jamie Fraser. Anyway, great book, fun Victober experience. A less fun Victober experience, but a notable book was The Dickens Boy by Thomas Keneally. And this is very sad. It's very sad. It is about Dickens' youngest son, Charles Dickens' youngest son, who has the weirdest nickname. It's about Charles Dickens' youngest son who goes by the nickname of Plorn, P-L-O-R-N, Plorn, and goes by the nickname of Plorn. And he needs to make a name for himself. He needs to do something with his life, and he's not very academic the way he's described. You might assume he's undiagnosed ADHD, like he's got to be moving all the time. But he's also not very athletic. He's not a hard worker, and he has not applied himself throughout his life and his schooling, and so they're not really sure what he should do. Dickens has some of his older sons in Australia running sheep farms and like running other people's sheep farms, but they're doing well. They're establishing wealth for themselves, and they're establishing themselves in a new country. And so Plorn is sent off to do the same. When he gets to his first, when he gets to the job that's been arranged for him, one of the men there, who's in a position of authority, makes Plorn feel very uncomfortable by bringing up Charles Dickens's treatment of his wife and the affair that everyone is talking about, and the rumors that Charles Dickens had a relationship with his wife's sister, which is not true, but at the time would have been, I mean, he definitely had a crush on her, but did not have a relationship with her. And at the time, people didn't know that, and it was definitely in the gossip papers. And so Plorn is having to face that in Australia, where society and social norms would dictate that in England he didn't have to face any of that because nobody would talk about it even if they were talking about it. But in Australia, people just boom, bring it right up to him and kind of make real clear judgments about his father and his family, and he doesn't like it. So he leaves that place and he goes to join another place, and it's just kind of his pilgrimage, quite literally, across Australia, looking for a place to be and having to constantly face his family's legacy. He's also got this big secret that he's never read a single one of his father's books, and he pretends, even to his father, that he's read them all. And so people talk to him about the characters in the books, and he gets things wrong, and he feels stupid, and he feels super guilty that he's never read any of his father's work. He loves his father. His father loves him. They have a great relationship. but they don't really know each other. And now they're on 2 different continents. There's some beautiful writing in this book, but overall, it's just like real melancholy and sad and hot and dusty. But there's some beautiful discussions, like this one where it says, this paragraph where one of the characters is saying, there is no way your English family can understand what you will go through here being Australia, the outback. Everyone here knows, but it is beyond the understanding of the best intentional scribe of colonial items in magazines and periodicals. Over there to the east, just to begin, there is a waterhole, which is sadly drying up at the moment, but may be redeemed for us by autumn rains. It is in fact a river course, the Peru. I'd say it's a channel, for it prefers to flow underground, and that is an oddity in and of itself. And then the conversation goes on, and the same man says, but children are a luxury who have not yet come our way. Yet by far the richest man in Australia today is a baron of sheep, a role we aspire to but cannot claim, not even with all of our square miles, and this baron has named not one sheep except for tracking and breeding purposes, as well as listing the rams in his stock book. And when drought strikes, well, there may be more profit in killing and boiling down sheep by the ton than in cropping their wool. For the truth is, we lack in these colonies sufficient mouths to eat the tens of thousands of sheep we stock. But when has there been such a golden marriage between a continent and a species of sheep, asked the poetic Willie Studer, and between a species of sheep and the great British wool manufactories? People speak of angelic choirs. Well, the consonances of all this are the harmonies of an angelic choir. And so sheep are very important in the story, as is that knowledge that it may be best to cut your losses. It may be best to kill your darlings. It may be best not to grow too attached to anything. I will not say that I enjoyed The Dickens Boy, but I will say I found it fascinating. And you may enjoy it quite a lot. I will never read it again. I'm not sad that I read it this once. I also read the second book in the Winter Street series, which is Winter Stroll by Ellen Hildebrand. These take me just a couple of hours to read if I am listening to the audiobook and doing other things. And so one Saturday I just started and finished that one in the morning, and they are just wonderful. If you're not familiar, it's the soap opera-y story of a family and all of their loves and losses and mistakes. You know, one of them is in prison for insider trading and just all sorts of fun stuff going on. But the relationships in the book, the series, are just really lovely and wonderful. And this is a reread for me, and I'm super enjoying it. For Victober, I also read and finished, this was the first one I finished. This was Anthony Hope's The Prisoner of Zenda, and this was awesome. I loved this book. I did not read the introduction until after I had read the book. The premise of the book is that there's this guy, and he is kind of teased by his family for not wanting to do any work. So he says he's going to go and travel abroad and write a travelogue and publish, and he's going to be a writer. And so his sister-in-law is like, finally, he's going to do something with his life. But he ends up getting enmeshed in, he doesn't get very far, and he ends up getting enmeshed in the politics of the country of Zenda, the fictional country of Zenda, because he looks just like the man who's about to be sworn in as king. The man who's about to be sworn in as king has a brother who really hates him and wants to assassinate him so that he can be king. And the actual man who is going to be sworn in as king meets with some kind of situation, which I won't go into so that you can be a little bit surprised, but he's not able to show up for his inauguration. And his people, his company, his advisors are very worried that if he doesn't show up for the inauguration, then his brother will just step in and take it, and they don't want him as king. So they beg this stranger from England to pretend to be the king and be sworn in. He falls in love. He has fights. The brother knows he's not his actual brother, but is pretending to be his brother, and isn't like, there's all sorts of political chess moves going on as they try and fight for the stability of this kingdom and for it to eventually fall into the best set of hands. And then he returns home and he's like, I didn't do anything. I didn't write my travelogue. I didn't do anything. Even though he's done all these amazing things. It was so much fun, this book. And when I read the introduction after I'd finished reading the actual book, I learned that he had been, I think, a solicitor. Like, I think he worked in law, the author, Anthony Hope, and he was able, with the proceeds that he earned from this book, to quit that and become a writer full-time. He wrote mainly books like this, and he is the one who formalized and made popular this false kingdom, this Balkan or Germanic kingdom where things are happening and it interacts with the real world. So what I immediately thought of was Zenobia in Princess Diaries. Like, you still see it today, and all of that comes from Anthony Hope. At the time, he was compared to Alexandre Dumas, and you can definitely, like, it's fast-paced, funny, swashbuckling, serious, sad, romantic. It was also compared to stories as told in Arthurian legend. It was just, it's not that heavy, but it's so much fun. I'm glad I discovered this. This will be a favorite for years to come. It would make a great read aloud book. It reads very quickly, very smoothly, and is enthralling and fun from beginning to end. And it keeps you on the seat of the edge of your seat. It keeps you on the seat of your edge. It keeps you on the edge of your seat. You know things are going to work out, but you don't know how they're going to work out. And yeah, just super fun. Highly, highly recommend. I think there is an old BBC drama from the 80s or the 90s that I'd like to find and watch of it. I think it would be great in film. Also for Victober, I read an adjacent book, Dickens and Prince, a particular kind of genius. And this one is by Nick Hornby, and this was fascinating. It's an extended, you can see it's quite short. It's an extended essay telling about the similarities between the lives and the creative process of Charles Dickens and the artist formerly known as Prince. The way that they made their decisions, interacted with women, did business, were creative, created way more than most creatives will ever create in their lifetime, and whether or not that was healthy for them or whether or not that hurt them. And I just think that it's a great book. It's a great book. It's a great exploration. It's very personal as well to Nick Hornby. It is, like I said, an extended essay. Don't expect like diving majorly into the depths of either of these individuals' lives, but you are going to get an overview of their life. Some Dickens work is spoiled in this, so if there's something you're hoping to read without spoilers, if there's a story out there by Dickens that you don't know, maybe hold off on this. You don't have to know much about either Dickens or Prince and their personal life to understand everything that's presented in this book. It's done really well. You can read it easily in one sitting, or you can kind of slowly digest it over a longer period of time. It is also broken into sections. And yeah, just really, really enjoyed it. Very pleased with that read. And I will definitely go back into it the next time that I pick up Dickens. And it also made me want to listen to Prince. I don't listen to Prince, was never into Prince, don't really understand the hype about Prince, but now I've been made curious. So, this was a huge win for me personally as a reader. I read The Witch Haven by Sasha Payton Smith. For whatever reason, this book just hit me right at the right time. It entered my life in just the right moment. I enjoyed this immensely. This is YA, and I really usually don't enjoy YA. It's a YA fantasy historical fiction, and it was perfection for me. I just really, really loved it. I loved the pacing. I loved the character development. I loved the writing style. I loved the premise. It was beautiful. So there's this girl, and she works in a sewing factory. She's orphaned, kind of. Her mom is in an asylum for the insane. Her dad is dead, and her brother has been recently murdered. And she gets attacked by her boss one night in the workroom, or attempted to be assaulted. And she doesn't know how really, but he gets stabbed in the neck and killed with her scissors, even though her scissors are across the room. As she is being interrogated by the police the following morning, this takes place in the early 1900s, and as she's being interrogated by the police the following morning, she the whole process is interrupted by these two women who arrive in an ambulance, come in and say, you have to come with us. Your results have come back. You have tuberculosis. We need to isolate you and treat you. And they whisk her off, and she ends up going to this sanatorium to heal from tuberculosis. She doesn't have tuberculosis. She's actually going to a school for witches. At this school for witches, things are a little bit strange, and she starts getting notes like on her pillow about her brother and his death. And she meets up with some young witches of various ages, because there's all sorts of women there, from young children to old women who are learning to be witches or who teach there or whatever. Like, it's a whole community of witches. She also realizes that some of the people her brother knew at his job, which was at a like social house or club for men, that they also have magic. And you, as you're reading, have no idea who to trust as she starts to trust people to try to get to the point and to get the kind of magic she needs to figure out who killed her brother and why. And you are flip-flopping back and forth with who to trust. She is also learning how to be a good friend, how to trust people. She's learning things about her family, her mother, her brother that she didn't know before. It is intensely wonderful, this whole book. And there is a second one, and I already bought it. And I can't wait to read it. I think I'm going to try to wait until January to read it, but I might read it in December. It's not going to make it into my November reads, I don't think, but I am really looking forward to reading anything and everything that this author writes. I now follow her on Instagram. Again, her name is Sasha Payton Smith, and she has another book coming out, another historical fiction fantasy that's not part of this series. So I don't know if Witch Haven is just a duology. The second book is called Witch Hunt, or if there will be more books. I don't know, but I will read everything that this author puts out, I think. I'll give it a try at least, because this book was a thing of beauty. I really, really, really enjoyed my time with that book. A book I read last month as an ARC, but also had a pre-order for because I order all of this author's books and read them and reread them and reread them. In fact, I'm planning a big reread of all her standalones in 2024. But that is Sophie Kinsella's The Burnout. As you can see, I am reading it. Again, I'm reading it slowly between different books that I read. I just read it last month, but again, it was an ARC, and this time I'm reading it in my physical copy just a month later, because I love Sophie Kinsella's writing. I love her characters. I love her books. And the character in this one reminds me so much of Becky Bloomwood, but in a totally different context. Becky Bloomwood being her most well-known character from the Shopaholic series, which I love. This is an auto-buy, auto-read author for me, a comfort read for me, and this is her newest book, and I'm loving it. It is about a woman, I think her name is Sasha. Is her name Sasha? Yeah, Sasha, who has a bit of a hilarious nervous breakdown at work and tries to join a nunnery in order to escape from her work situation. Believe me, I've considered such things. Not a nunnery, but like when you get to a point sometimes where you are super stressed out, you only think of scary options. And eventually you're glad they don't pan out. That's kind of what happens to her. She literally runs into a wall while being chased down the street by a nun. And all is well from there. Her mom decides, after she's given by a doctor 3 weeks of time off from work for mental health reasons, she sets up with her mom to return to the coastal vacation spot of her family's youth. And of course, as these things go, nothing is as she remembers it when she was a child. She actually ends up being there at the same time in the off season in a dilapidated, slowly dying hotel that was once the pride of the coast. She ends up being there in this off season with a guy named Finn, who also spent his childhoods there and who, for other reasons, has been given time off work and told he needs to take a vacation. And so at first they kind of hate each other. And as the story unfolds, they start to understand each other a little bit more, start to realize they actually knew each other when they were children. And it's just really lovely and delightful and hilarious, as all Sophie Kinsella books are. But this one really seems to be like touching back on some of the earlier, crazier hijinks of characters that I really enjoy. I know sometimes people read Sophie Kinsella books and they're like, okay, this is a rom-com, but this is like way more comedy than rom. And I like that. I like that a lot. And I really like the character of Sasha and the crazy things that she ends up getting into. Like when I say hijinks, I mean hijinks. So if you're looking for a fun read, that is a fun one. And I'm not tired of it, even though I read it last month and I'm reading it again this month. I am also in the midst of Artie Blackmore's Lorna Doone. I hate the writing and I love the story. There are some really amazing points in here and like places in the story. I like the way the story is unfolding. I just really, there's so much brogue and I get really, like, it's very slow reading. So it feels plodding. And then we'll get into a part where it's less talk, more like descriptive action. And I read through that very quickly and it's beautiful and wonderful. Like the scene where the mother goes to face the Dunes, the head of the Dunes, to say, like, you killed my husband, is so vivid and intense. Whew, loved it so much. I also really loved, like, because it's first person and it's this, like, through the reminiscences of one of the main characters, and he starts by telling you like what school was like in the 1600s, and it's so vivid and I love it so much. He's talking about little like pranks that people did on each other and just all sorts of things, and it just really brings the male classroom in the 1600s to life. Like, it's really beautiful, some things in here, but at the same time it also reads really ploddingly. It's not boring, it's just difficult. So I don't know if I will finish this before the month is up, but I'll finish it before the year is up. I'm very invested in the characters. I want to know the story, but it's not even helped much by an audiobook because I can't understand what the narrator is saying like a fourth of the time. So just, it takes concentration. It takes concentration, and that's not a flaw. It's just an observation. I am plowing through A London Home in the 1890s. This is the final in a 3-part installment. of M.V. Hughes's reminiscences of growing up in the Victorian era. The first and the second one were wonderful and great, and if you haven't read them, I highly recommend them. They can be read so quickly. It's so personable. It feels like a conversation. It feels like sitting down with an elderly relative and listening to them talk to you about their story, and it's lovely, and I highly recommend these. I have started but haven't gotten very far in Simon Maurer's Ancestry, a novel. I don't really have much to say about this yet, because I'm really not very far. I think I'm on page 30 something. Yeah, I'm literally on page 30. Very short chapters, kind of a dry style of writing, fiction, but backed up with, like, I think it's the fictionalization of real people. So it's also including like images from actual censuses and ship logs, things like that. But at the same time, it is also fiction. It's an interesting concept. It's an interesting read, just not very far in it. I don't have a full feel for what I'm gonna find in it, but enjoying it. I am in the midst of The Maiden's Bequest by George MacDonald. As you can see, I'm tabbing this one. I'm loving this one. I did hit a bit of a hiccup. I read like the first 100 pages in one sitting, but I did hit a bit of a hiccup when we reached a point where there is some animal abuse, and I lost a little trust in my good friend George MacDonald. The animal survives, but it's still pretty graphic in its discussion of treatment of a dog. So if that is something that, it's a mean dog, but it's still a dog. And if that is something that bothers you like it bothers me, please just be forewarned. I did skim some of it, but not soon enough to not have realized what I was reading. There's also really terrible circumstances for this young girl, who is the main character in here. Annie is her name. She is orphaned at a young age. She's a little match girl kind of character. She does have a place to live. She does go to live with some family who are terrible people. They're not cruel, they're just selfish and stupid, and they do mean things because they're mean people, but they're not abusive in any way. And she makes friends with an older boy at the school who kind of has her back because she's young and sweet, and he cares about people, and he gets into a lot of trouble. But he's strong enough and brave enough to stand up to some of the people who are abusive, like the schoolmaster. Another interesting view of school, this time from the 1800s, and it's pretty heartbreaking. There's a lot of heartbreak in this, but also always with this glimmer of hope. Yeah, it's pretty melancholy, it's pretty sad, but also really well written and full of life. And I'm very hopeful for little Annie, and I need to see her through. I'm really loving this, but it's a hard, sad story. So I actually would highly recommend it at this point, but I'm not done with it yet. And then finally, I am also reading Anthony Trollope. I've read that much and I have that much to go. I'm about 6 chapters behind of my reading schedule at the moment of taping this, but I will say Anthony Trollope broke my heart with The Warden. The Warden was the first book that I read by Anthony Trollope, and I almost didn't pick up Barchester Towers because I became so invested in The Warden and I loved the writing so much, and then that ending just ruined me. And so I didn't want to pick up Barchester Towers, and I think that, that would have been a huge mistake. Pick up Barchester Towers. I think that always, you know how they do Little Women and Good Wives as one volume now? I really believe that The Warden and Barchester Towers should be one volume now. But I have a lack of trust in Anthony Trollope. I do not always believe that he is going to bring his characters through in a way that will satisfy me as a reader. And I pick up his books with trepidation and hold them like at arm's length, which is really hard to do with a huge book like this, where you know that you're going to really delve into characters' lives. And I would say that I fell in love with this book about 4 chapters in. I love this book. I love this book. Some of it reminds me of Dickens. Some of it reminds me of Pickwick. It is such a soap opera. It's so hilarious. There's so many beautiful little details about Victorian life. I love the guy who sells the metal furniture. If you've read the book, if you know, you know. And I love like the super stingy cheapness of one of the wives. I won't tell you who right now, but like to the point where she'll feed herself, but she won't feed anyone else in the house. I love the conversations that are had in like the business travelers dining room of a certain place. I love the way that he keeps, even though Trollope keeps kind of repeating himself, it's from different perspectives. It is a delight of a book. Orley Farm is an absolute delight of a book. It could be read so quickly. My goal was to read 3 chapters a night, regardless of the length of what 3 chapters a night would be, but that worked out to be about 35 pages per chunk. And you could read it a lot faster than that. It's very, very readable. The conversations are laugh out loud funny, but also I've teared up a couple of times. I did not anticipate this from Anthony Trollope. I did not think that Anthony and Trollope and I had this kind of relationship, and we do. I think for me, maybe the way to go with Anthony Trollope is the standalones. I am looking forward to picking up another one. I think next year I'm going to read Dr. Wardle's School, Mr. Wardle's School, which is another standalone. I really love all the characters in this book, even the ones that you're supposed to hate. I love them. There's not a single chapter where I'm like, oh, it's about this family. I want to know everything that's going on in all the families. Now, I will say this. I do have a page in my journal where I have drawn family trees and connected relationships, because there are a lot of people in this book and it's hard to keep track of them. And there's no like cast of characters or list of characters provided in my edition. Maybe in another edition there is, but that will be a super big help to you. I'm also listening to it as I read. And while I do not think that is necessary, I do think that it's adding an awful lot to my reading experience. I look forward to finishing this one and giving you a final update on it, but wow, my mind is blown. Last year, my mind was blown because I have always said that I hate Thomas Hardy, and I do hate Thomas Hardy as a general rule, but I went ahead and read The Mayor of Casterbridge with the group last year and absolutely fell in love with The Mayor of Casterbridge. This year, I had decided that I wanted one of those long, meandery kind of Victober books, and I knew that I needed to head to Trollope for that, for what I was feeling I wanted, and this does not disappoint. This is so funny and so heartfelt, and yes, mysterious, but like not mysterious like Dickens mysterious. You are less concerned with whether or not the documents are forged, with whether or not people are getting what they should be getting. You're less concerned with that than you are concerned with what the mystery of that does to people and how people treat each other as a result of the mystery. So there is the mystery, but you're watching like people, small town people interact with each other, weird little romances that develop. And when I say weird little romances, I mean weird little romances that develop all over the place. Where sympathies lie and where they don't. People's strange little idiosyncrasies. It is a little bit Middlemarch, a little bit Bleak House, and a lot Anthony Trollope. A little bit Pickwick, and a lot Anthony Trollope. I am really, really enjoying this book. Really enjoying it. And it is the highlight of my reading each day, although I am a couple of days behind. But it really is the highlight of my reading each day. And no one is more surprised than me. Last year, thanks to Victober, I had to rechange my vocabulary around Thomas Hardy. And this year, because of Victober, I'm going to have to change my vocabulary around the way that I talk about my relationship with Anthony Trollope. And I am going to steer clear of the Palliser series. And I still haven't read the last Chronicle of Barset. But I'm going to pick up more of his standalones because I'm really loving Orley Farm. I mean, it's up there. It may be up there in like my top 10 favorite Victorian novels. I don't know how it's going to end. We'll see how it ends because I also love The Warden until the end. So see, there's also that doubt. I still have that doubt. I still doubt him. I still don't trust Anthony Trollope. But that's what I have read and that's what I am reading. And those are the books that I should have been updating you on all month long in this vlog, but I just haven't. And I will be popping in a second for you, in a few days for me, with the results of my reading for the rest of the books. I also am listening to The Dress Diary. I'm not making a huge amount of progress in that. I think I really need a physical copy of The Dress Diary. So I may actually stop listening to that and just wait and get a physical copy. If I do that, I'm gonna probably want to wait until it's in paperback. So maybe next Victober I'll revisit The Dress Diary of Anne Sykes, which is fascinating, but also I want to see like the accompanying images, and I don't have a PDF or anything for it. So probably going to pause on that. And that is where I am right now in the reading for my Victober and October reads in general. I'll wait to tell you all the things that I didn't get to in the next bit where I pop in, but that's the update. All right, here it is, last check-in for Victober. It's early on a Sunday morning and I'm just kind of trying to fit this in. This was not the greatest vlog, but here it is. 2 books that I forgot to mention that I had already finished reading. I finished reading them early on in the month. One is not Victober related. It is my book of the month pick and it was supposed to be a spooky read, and that is The Stranger Upstairs. Hi Lola, did you want to say something? Oh, thank you. I love you too. I love you too. Okay, so it was The Stranger Upstairs by Lisa M. Matlin. It was supposed to be my spooky pick. It's about a woman who on the cover of the book is kind of billed as a influencer, but she's not really an influencer. She's pretending to be a psychologist, and she's written a book. And when I say pretending, I mean pretending. Everything she's doing is a facade in some way, shape, or form. She buys this house and she gets it cheap because it was a murder house, and she's going to refurbish it. But then she runs into some issues with neighbors. Strange things start happening. Excuse me. She starts losing time. Her marriage is falling apart, and thanks for coming over. Thanks for coming to see what's going on. Yeah. And I didn't enjoy it. I didn't like being in this woman's head. If you've been around my channel for a while, you'll know that I'm okay with unlikable characters, but I really don't like it when it's the narrator and we're in their head and I have to spend an entire book with a character that doesn't have a redemption arc if they're unlikable. And not every character has to have a redemption arc, but if they're the narrator and they're incredibly unlikable, then for me to enjoy the book by the end, that narrator has to have learned something, and that doesn't happen in this book. And also, I just feel like the reveal was big thumbs down from me. So my first book of the month book that I truly didn't enjoy had also finished an audiobook, A House at the End of the Moor, and I really enjoyed this. This was great. It starts with a woman who is in the Victorian era who's renting a home in Yorkshire somewhere, the edge of the moor. She's got a secret past, and she and her housewoman, who is more like a friend, out walking on the moor one evening, and they find a body, and the body is alive. They find a man, but they take him home, and he's injured, and he's got a past. And then the next day, there's a knock on the door, and it's the local police officer who's not a good guy, and he's looking for an escaped convict. And all the story rolls out from there, and it's great. It's really, really readable. I really enjoyed it. It was fun historical fiction. It is Christian historical fiction. It's a romance. There's not a lot of like preachiness in it. It just has a nice, warm feel, and it was lovely. I really enjoyed it. Really enjoyed it. Good writing, and I would read more from this author. In fact, I have a book by her that I've had on my shelf for a very long time. A Christmas book, 12 Days of, I'm looking at my shelf, 12 Days of something, I don't know, Dickens is in there somewhere. I also read the last installment in this memoir series by M.V. Hughes. This one was A London Home in the 1890s. These are great. They're so great. They're highly readable. I really enjoyed it. I've spent 3 months with M.V. Hughes now, going through her life in these very slim volumes, and I loved these a lot. And I would read them again, and I would use them as resources, and I would use parts of them and bits of them, and yeah, I think they're excellent if you can. They're pretty cheap everywhere online, and if you could get your hands on a set of them, I highly recommend. I finished reading, I've mentioned all of these previously in my last clip, so by this time now, a little over a week later, I have finished reading The Maiden's Bequest by George MacDonald, and I absolutely loved this one. This is 5 stars, and it might have reignited my George MacDonald fandom. I think I have one more unread George MacDonald on my shelf, but I've already started looking at Better World Books to see what other ones I can get. I think I would like to start rereading some George MacDonald. I haven't really read him since college until now. The Maiden's Bequest was wonderful. It's about, well, I already kind of told you what it's about. I don't think I need to tell you any more of the story because that would be spoilers, but it's so good. So good. Very satisfying ending. Loved it. I ended up listening to and not even trying to read. And maybe part of that is this old, like, yellowed, look how tiny that type is. It's so small. That could have been part of my experience. I just found this book so difficult to read, but I really loved the story. I wanted to know what would happen, and I wanted to finally say I've read Lorna Doone. And so now I can finally say I've read Lorna Doone, but I listened to the entire thing. I did not read that physical book after the first 150 pages or so. I just went, this is ridiculous. I can't do it, and put the book aside, but continued listening to my copy that I had from Audible, which was among their free choices when you are a subscriber. And then finally, the piece de resistance of Victober, for me anyway, was this mammoth of an Anthony Trollope, Orley Farm. And I've already told you what this is about, and I've already told you how I was feeling about it. And now I can say, now that I finished it, I'm so proud of myself for reading this month. I only read 16 books to completion this month, and that is not very many for me at all. And there were moments when I thought, I don't know if I can finish this book. But I did. I finished it, so I'm so proud of myself for that. But also, I really loved it. I really, really loved Orley Farm, and I am going to approach Trollope via his standalones from here on out. And if I build like a serious love for Trollope based on his standalones, then I will go ahead and try his Palliser series and maybe even retry the Barset Chronicles. But I really disliked the Barset Chronicles in my time with them, so I was surprised when I loved Orley Farm as much as I did. I really did, though. Absolutely loved Orley Farm. This is a super long vlog, so this is a super long sit down with a lot of B-roll. So I'm going to stop now and not talk for much longer. But I just want to say thank you to the creators of Victober. Thank you to the people who keep it going every year. Victober, I now call October Victober to people who aren't part of my reading community. Like, it's become the norm of my life and the life of many other people. And it's such a positive influence, and it's such a beautiful time of year. I really look forward to Victober every year, and I just want to say thank you from the very bottom of my heart. I need to take my dog for a walk because she's going to go crazy with energy. You have no idea what she's doing. I'm very distracted because she's just like into everything. So I'm gonna go. But another successful Victober in the books, and now on to November reads. Upward and Beyond. Let's go read. Upward and Beyond. Let's go read.